Hey guys, so you've just bought a brand new game for your PC. You boot it up, and what's the very first thing that you do? No, before you start a new game, and before you turn off subtitles, and before you invert the X-axis on your mouse. No, wait, because who would do that? Before all of those things, if you're anything like me anyway, you jump straight into the graphics settings and begin tweaking. Fortunately, due to my huge cranial capacity, I can indeed distinguish between the terms low, medium, and high. But it's all those advanced graphics settings that can cause problems. So many strange words, numbers, and bloody abbreviations. What does it all mean? Well, if you're the same, then fear not, because over the course of the next 2 episodes of Reality Check, I'm going to investigate these different terms and figure out exactly what they mean and also what they do to give you those sweet, sexy graphics. Okay, let's start with the easy one, resolution. This is simply a measure of the number of horizontal pixels by the number of vertical pixels being output by the display. Unlike with console gaming, there are typically a bunch of different options available for PC at a load of weird and wonderful aspect ratios. So why does resolution matter? Well, ultimately, the higher resolution you display at, the more detail you get, and therefore the better the image. It also helps prevent unwanted graphical oddities like aliasing. And speaking of which, have you ever looked really closely while playing a game and noticed that some of the edges can appear jaggy? Well, this is because of aliasing, and it's an artifact of displaying digital graphics. You see, any object in a video game is ultimately made out of pixels. Now, straight lines don't have any issues, but as soon as you try to draw a diagonal, things go a bit weird and bumpy. Okay, let's use Photoshop to demonstrate this. Here's a straight line of pixels. All is good, a nice crisp edge. However, if I try to draw something at an angle now, suddenly things get all jaggy. Now, what anti-aliasing does is try to get rid of those jagged edges and make everything look silky smooth by changing the color of pixels around the edge so that there's a gradual blend of color. Interestingly, you can turn this on as an effect in Photoshop. Check it out. Now, if we zoom out a little, much smoother. While anti-aliasing can have a substantial effect on image quality, it is pretty heavy on the old processor because it has to render all those extra color pixels. Thankfully though, there are a number of different types of anti-aliasing to choose from. Multi-sample anti-aliasing, or MSAA. This tries to be smarter and less demanding on your machine by applying itself only to the parts of each frame that will look jagged rather than the whole image. It's selective really on where and what it works on. Fast approximate anti-aliasing, or FXAA. Now this is the fastest and least process-heavy mode of all anti-aliasing. The reason is that it doesn't use high-resolution frame data. Instead, it's applied straight to the pixels on screen at the resolution you're playing at. It's more blurry and doesn't look quite as good, but it's significantly less demanding. Temporal anti-aliasing, TXAA, sometimes MLAA. Okay, this is potentially the best one. This is a bit like MSAA, but with an extra step. You see, TXAA takes into account previous frames to produce its own next frame by averaging the colors. Also, the final way to be aliasing, which I mentioned earlier, is our old friend resolution. You just need more of it. Check it out. Here we have another lovely blue line, except this time it's at a much higher resolution. In fact, this is at 4K. This time, if we turn the high resolution line to the diagonal without anti-aliasing, well, you don't really notice those jaggies at all. Now, they're still there. If we zoom right in, you can see, but the resolution is so great that the size of each pixel relative to the whole shape is much smaller, and so that stare effect is really reduced. In fact, at 4K, aliasing pretty much stops being an issue altogether. If you're trying to push your machine to the limit with a brand new processor-intensive game, aliasing is not the only thing to worry about. You've also got to contend with the dreaded screen tear. Screen tear happens when your graphics card and your display aren't really on the same page. It's all to do with frame rate and refresh rate. So, when you're running around shooting wildlife in Far Cry 3, your graphics card is hard at work outputting frames at a hopefully steady rate. This is measured in frames per second, or FPS. Your monitor, on the other hand, is also refreshing its display at a set rate per second, called the refresh rate. Now, if these are out of sync, it can result in your display refreshing and showing information from 2 or more frames at the same time, leading to the appearance of nasty tears. and this is exactly what Vsync aims to mitigate. Now, it does so by locking the frame rate output of your graphics card to match the refresh rate of your monitor. In reality though, this does come with its own issues, as it can cause the gameplay to stutter whenever the GPU frame rate drops below the display refresh rate. This usually happens when there's a whole lot of stuff going on screen at once. Interestingly though, Nvidia have come up with a cool new solution for this, and it's called G-Sync. The tech, which is built into special monitors, enables the display to refresh as soon as it gets a new frame, meaning it can match exactly the output of the graphics card. So with G-Sync, the monitor is keeping toe-to-toe with the GPU, rather than the other way around. This in theory lets you get the absolute best performance and frame rate from your machine. Okay, time to stop fixing problems and start just making things look awesome. Now, all objects in video games are made up of larger units called polygons. Tessellation basically means taking a polygon and breaking it up into smaller bits. So why is this useful? Well, it allows your PC to generate greater detail in the object using these smaller parts. It's particularly useful for generating height and depth. With tessellation, developers can apply displacement maps, basically maps of height information, to a polygon, and the tessellation will calculate and generate the appropriate level of depth, making for more realistic images. This also helps with creating nice, smooth, rounded objects. Well, I don't know about you guys, but that's about all the technical graphics jargon I can handle for this episode. So make sure you come back next week where we'll chat SSAO, depth of field, texture filtering, motion blur, and maybe some PhysX as well. Oh, and for a deep dive into frame rates and whether they matter for gaming, check out my previous episode of Reality Check, Do We Need 60 FPS on PS4 and Xbox One. Remember, if you think I've missed anything in this episode, or if there's anything in particular you'd like me to mention next week, do let me know in the comments down below, or by dropping me a tweet at CamFrazRob. Okay guys, see you next week.